This is Big Man Tyrone, and you're about to watch the MtG Cabal cast with your hosts, Woad, Thirsty, and Reptar. Sub to us on all your podcast networks at MtG Cabal Cast and YouTube.
All right, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal Cast. Some exciting things going on in the greater marketplace is what we're going to cover today. So Channel Fireball, for those of you that don't know, is launching a platform. It's kind of in competition with TCG Player, kind of in competition with Troll's Evo system. Just interesting what's going on there. And I think it's good for the industry because competition is good. What can I say? Yep. But we're basically going to break down what the important things are about this kind of Audible and Channel's business model is. Obviously, the merger with Good Games happened, and then we knew changes would be coming. So yes, they're kind of upon us. So let's get started.
Yep. So you mentioned Good Games. There's the Binder POS merger, I think, as well. And now we're looking at Channel's brand new system, which they tweeted about over the last 8 days or so, the CFB marketplace, and was what they're calling it. And they made, I guess, what we could call a clarification on what's going to happen. And the idea is that this is going to be a market space for LGSs to operate, and they wouldn't compete with the individual. The individual could still work on TCG Player. And in the announcement that they made last week, it sounds like now you have to have a brick and mortar to be able to compete on this market space. You can't just be an entity in the space. You can't have, a setup inside like a room in a mall, or you can't have a dedicated booth somewhere without frontage, essentially.
Basically, to me, it sounds like, look at what Wizards would require from you in order to get allocation from them.
Yep.
That's what we want. We don't want backpackers on this. I think, to me, it seems like it's coming, if we're working with brick and mortars, they're recognizing the opportunity that exists to actually push up these brick and mortars, where Wizards of the Coast has kind of left them by the wayside and started doing, fulfillment by Amazon and all this other stuff. And I think it's a great opportunity, and I actually like the brick and mortar only model. I think that is great, and I hope it takes off, because I think that one of the problems with brick and mortars selling on TCG is they can't necessarily compete with the guy who only has logistical overhead and isn't paying rent, isn't paying employees, is kind of grinding up his binder and selling on TCG with just no overhead, basically.
Yep.
One thing that I think is kind of interesting about this, and this was pointed out in our Discord as well, I believe, the difference between an LGS with a $7 minimum wage and a $15 minimum wage is really going to stick out on this platform. That'll be interesting to see. But I think, for me, even as someone who doesn't, I'm not selling as an LGS, I kind of prefer this model. I think it's good. I would much rather, as an LGS, sell in competition with other LGSs. Now, the telling thing is, well, if prices are lower on TCG Player, how are you going to compete?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think for me, it's the clarification that it will only be LGSs. You have to be able to receive allocation. And one of the issues with that is that if you have frontage, you can receive allocation, but it doesn't matter what your business is, right?
Yep.
From distro. There's a store in this state that is nested inside a computer repair shop. It has its own name, and it has its own dedicated space and play space, and they get allocation to that store, but it's the other business was started first. In theory, that store should be able to sell on this platform, but somebody who might operate similarly out of somebody else's frontage that doesn't have their own dedicated name on a board or their own dedicated address, but still has an EIN and a tax ID, won't be able to if they follow that model. And I think that's kind of where it gets a little squirrely. Obviously, I do agree that your average backpacker shouldn't be there. They're not running the business. But somebody who's nested inside another organization or might be running the card portion of what goes on in an LGS does kind of get a little stuffed. There's another store up here. It's business name and an individual's eBay name, and the individual serves the high-end cards and a lot of the singles. Does that person have the ability to sell on this platform? based on what we're hearing, probably not. But the brick and mortar that they work out of would. And I think that's where things got a little dicey in this announcement. I don't think it's bad overall. I think it's just this kind of weird, hard turn that they took for clarification's sake that might not have been necessary. And I think it does kind of dunk on some people that were interested in selling on this platform that have a business. They're set up legitimately. They just don't have frontage.
Yeah, and I think that's, there is the evidence or there are cases, like you said, where you have a shop like inside of a shop. And I definitely think that it's a little unfair to those spaces. And I think the interesting thing is that, and this is common in booths, and I've noticed this a lot working booths, is right after the channel change, where they didn't allow floor trading anymore, you had this split of vendors where some were like, fuck backpackers, nobody likes them anyways. And then you had people like you and I who were kind of like, we started that way.
Yeah.
Like, you can't be mad at those guys. Like, that was you 10 years ago. And now you have this booth, and this seems like almost kind of another way for channel to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Is like them saying, well, if you won't take GPs from us, we'll just do something that's for, the vendors only.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting way of looking at it. And I think that I would honestly kind of like to see TCG take up as like the backpacker platform and Channel Fireball take off as the LGS platform, just to see what happens with those two divergent paths.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be, again, the key thing is if there's more exposure on TCG, if there's cheaper prices on TCG, why wouldn't we just sell on TCG and buy on TCG?
Yep.
So it's something I'm excited for, but I'm interested to see what their value add is.
Yeah, I think some of that and the disparate prices will see the benefit to this system that supports the LGS model is most likely in sealed.
Yeah, I think so for sure, because especially, obviously one of their biggest things to compete with TCG on is the fee structure. Mm-hmm. If you can be more favorable to your brick and mortars, they're probably going to go there because it's lower overhead on their end. Yep. And being able to sell sealed at a decent margin and not have to compete with FBA by Wizards of the Coast would be a pretty huge deal. Mm-hmm. And I think, like you said, sealed, and that's one of the important things is, they really can't cover any card games that TCG doesn't cover already. Although I think it will be interesting to see what happens with Flesh and Blood. I don't know if you knew this. TCG currently has a Flesh and Blood incentive program running, where if you sell X amount of Flesh and Blood on their platform, TCG will pay you $300.
Huh.
Well, Channel's running all of the organized play for Flesh and Blood, so presumably they will be the preferred marketplace for something like Flesh and Blood.
That's pretty
so I think that'll be interesting to see how people start doing that, because you have, TCG doing that, and then there's a lot of stores that started on like Shopify or Square.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, those companies do rolling capital loans, where they will reclaim payments through your transactions every month. And that's a great value add for them. And it's just interesting. I'm curious, once we get into the minutia and we have the full announcement of what the CFB marketplace is, what that value add is for them over something like a TCG. And I think it is going to boil down to, they're not fixed margins anymore because we got rid of MSRP.
Yep.
But if I'm selling sealed product exclusively on Channel's marketplace and I'm selling it for $120 and I'm netting $10 more than I would on TCG, I'm going to do that all day.
Yeah.
And finite supply of, I won this bucks. TCG player going to have to go to the Channel marketplace. All right. I will say, I think one of the value adds that they have the potential for, and this is something they have mentioned, is the store credit system.
Yep.
I think being able to go to an event, to trade in at Channel Fireball, to get store credit, and then spend it on anyone in the platform is huge. And that's something that TCG kind of did early on, and I guess was kind of trying to get back into, but just not nearly on the scale that Channel can do, because Channel already has that established, these are our buy list numbers, this is what we're doing. Come to our events, grind side events, get store credit, spend it on the website.
Yep.
And I think that's huge because, one of the things about store credit is if anyone has any amount at an LGS, sometimes it just sits there forever and you never spend it because they don't have the cards you want. And I think that having the opportunity to be on this open market platform where there's, potentially thousands of LGSs selling singles means you're much more likely to get that stuff.
Yes,
and I think that especially, it's interesting that this happens right after the Good Games merger when they try to sell a bunch of inventory and they inherit Good Games inventory because obviously Good Games is going to be selling on the platform.
Mm-hmm.
So when you trade in, Good Games gets those cards and they'll just sell them on the channel platform. But I think that is honestly, as a player, as someone buying cards, probably the best added value of any marketplace system there's ever been.
Yep, I agree. It's a huge value prop. I've seen it happen on the occasion at events. It happened here and there when I was with Face because we had people come to us from Canada inside the US. And we had access to our back-end system, so we could just give them credit right then and there if that's what they wanted to take. No muss, no fuss.
Yeah.
It happened extremely infrequently with Troll. And I've never heard of anybody else doing that. And I think that's incredible because, like you said, it allows people to shop across the entirety of the platform. And the only other time I'd ever heard of that happening was when TCG Player showed up at Gen Con when the year they released their buy list system, and they were buying at their booth because TCG Player isn't its own unique entity. You're essentially just racking up credit on the system. That's the only time I've ever heard it.
Yeah,
a focused push for credit at an event, and I think it's huge for the individuals and allows the LGS to serve a wider audience, which is basically what you want as an LGS. You want to serve the widest customer base you can, and this allows you to.
Yeah, and I think the important thing too is the payout for the brick and mortar. My understanding is they're getting paid out in cash despite store credit being used. It's just cash minus higher fees.
Yeah.
Sure, whatever.
Yep.
I mean, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that, it's an opportunity. Obviously, you go to a Star City event, you can get Star City credit.
Yeah.
But that's not nearly the same thing as what this has the potential to be. And that's because, obviously I can go to my LGS and see what they have in the case, or I can just order it off of the website if they have it uploaded on the Channel Fireball marketplace and be like, all right, cool. Well, this is where I'm selling now.
Yep.
And I think that's a lot better for the players, which, again, if, Channel we're hitting the brick and mortars by realizing they're kind of floundering because of Wizards, and we want an opportunity for the players, especially grinders, and if Mythic Fests, Grand Prix, whatever, do take on this more regional thing, that's when I think this store credit system is going to be critically important.
Yep.
Because being able to get, trade into Channel and have a global reach, well, I couldn't find the random June 2 stakes foil I needed for my EDH deck here. Channel's got it on their website. Or on their marketplace, sorry. Just go for it there.
Yeah.
It makes it a lot easier.
No, absolutely. And I think it also has the added bonus of allowing smaller LGSs to take swings at larger buys and not have to worry about what they're going to do with that stock. My LGSs, they sure can buy large stock, but there are not a lot of people that are going to walk in and buy it, so they have to essentially have the out lined up already, be it buy a list or to somebody else dedicated in the area that they're going to reach out to.
Yeah.
And it's not the worst problem in the world, but not every LGS has that opportunity, and it would be nice to be able to buy anything and everything that walks into your store or up to your booth at an event, at a local event, and know that you're going to be able to strike a deal with this customer, you're going to make this person happy, and you're not going to be stuck with it because you can toss it up on this platform and get rid of it. And I think that's huge.
Yeah, and I think, people will say, well, you can do that on TCG Player already, right, but you can't do it with store credit. And I know plenty of people that their entire model is arbitraging store credit from Card Kingdom to Star City back and forth based on whatever their hot list is at the time. I know for a fact there were times at Miniature Market where we would get a buy from someone and it would be packaged from Card Kingdom. And it would have, an individual's name and whatever their account information was handwritten on a note per the purchase when they leave special instructions. that happens all the time, and I think the ability to do this with a like global singles selection is enormous. Because it, when you do it when you're trying to get to power on like Card Kingdom or Star City or Abu, their prices are obviously inflated because they know what's going on.
Yep.
They don't want to just sell it for that. And being able to hit this effectively at a low market rate with just store credit is a huge opportunity. So that'll be interesting to see if that buy list does start to shift things a little bit more.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think it'll take some time to shake out, especially with events in the future and what those bring. Definitely. Then there's something else that ran alongside this in parallel, unrelated to the platform, and it's that Channel Fireball is going to be a preferred, or rather the expansion grader for Premier card grading out of New Zealand.
Yeah, so. This is the funny thing to me is that Sasso was talking like a couple weeks prior about how CGC should be the standard of grading. Dude, come on. you can't say that and then announce that you're partnering for an expansion of a grading company. You know better.
Yep.
I think this is interesting. I think that the last year and a half, when we've had all these delays and PSA, BGS, SCG even hit a delay, which for those of you in Magic may not know, SCG, they're like the number 3 in sports cards. Yep. And you've seen a bunch of companies pop up since. Hybrid Grading Approach, HGA, with their custom labels has been huge. CGC obviously got in on the sports cards game with CSG. And now we have this. And it's interesting that, this coincided kind of with the announcement that the USPS wasn't shipping to Australia or New Zealand anymore, which is relevant because here we have the US expansion. I think this is, again, I think competition is good.
Yes.
It breeds innovation. The labels are crisp and clean. I'm really going to be interested to see what this does, not to the Magic graded market, but to the Flesh and Blood graded market. Because again, Channel being the preferred vendor.
There it is. So I've got a statement about this I'll bring up in a minute. The only reason I like this is because it introduces specialists into the marketplace.
Yeah.
Previously, we hadn't had people working within the card gaming industry specialize at grading houses, if you want to think of them that way.
Yeah.
And I would assume they're not cross-trained entirely. So, if Bob's absent over in sports cards and his desk is full, but John's over in Pokemon and has got nothing, could he, pop over and do that? Yeah, I'm sure, absolutely, but I don't think that's the way they want to operate. So bringing in these kind of dedicated specialists to the card gaming area, I think is going to be great overall, and it's something I would have liked to see across all these organizations. My problem with going to one of the largest vendors in this space, especially for something like Flesh and Blood, is this parallels, if you watch the Bob Ross documentary that went up on Netflix a couple of weeks ago, the only people that can grade and determine whether or not a Bob Ross painting is authentic is Bob Ross Inc., which is not a company run by Bob Ross. It is run by his two partners that essentially stole his name from him and have been seen forging Bob Ross paintings in their warehouses.
Yeah.
So it definitely breeds a bit of murkiness, and I do worry about that. We know, who is it that got slammed for incorrect grading?
PSA and BGS both recently.
Yeah, for cutting cards and stuff like that,
yep.
Cleaning up corners and stuff like that. Yeah, you're the only people in the industry. How do we know this is going to really work out? Because, to your statement earlier, competition breeds innovation. There's no other specialists in the marketplace yet. So, you get to just kind of run roughshod, so to speak, in whatever you're going to do right now. And that worries me a little bit. Not entirely. CFB, for the length of time I've been playing this game and working in the industry, has been on the up and up.
For sure, yeah.
So I'm not too worried about it, but it is something that floats around in the old noodle.
Well, and especially, PWCC just got, banned from eBay. They're being investigated as PSA by the FBI for fraud.
But were they both for shill bidding?
PSA was and BGS were being investigated for grades.
Yeah,
not shill bidding.
Okay.
But PWCC was shill bidding.
Yes,
but
yeah.
I do agree that getting specialists in this is important. It's, kind of like, and the same thing does exist in sports cards, where vintage cards were printed on a completely different card stock, treated differently, processed differently than modern cards. So you do have people who specialize in, like, I grade vintage cards only, I grade modern cards. And I think that that's important because the processes involved across card hobbies are not the same in manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important that you have these specialized people who understand, like, look, I look at Pokemon cards 8 hours a day. I can tell you from looking at it, this is probably going to grade at this raw. And having that guy there is important because it does allow for a little bit more consistent grading without something like HGA uses where you're looking at it with software or anything like that. Now, the interesting thing about PCG is if you go to their website, which is at the bottom of the, like, banner ad, they don't say if they grade by hand or use software. They just say consistent modern grading, and there's not a whole lot of information on it.
Yeah, they're opaque right now.
Yeah, and it's, the New Zealand launch was September 10th, so we're 4 days into that. But we do have a North America and an Australia expansion coming as well, which, of course, are Channel Fireball and Good Games. So it seems like this was part of the merger.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see what this does. I think that we may see more on-site grading at events, which would be great.
That was something
to be able to go. Yeah, to go to, like, a Flesh and Blood or Magic event and be able to say, look, on-site grading, here's a raw slab, take it. And, Beckett does that, PSA does that, but what they'll do is they will put it in, do I have any of them handy? I do not. The, like, soft, yes, I do, here we go. These soft loaders like this, slap a sticker right here, and it'll have a raw grade on it. So it's not quite encapsulated, but it is at least a grade from them. And I think that'll be, I think that is a good thing for the industry as well, as getting more on-site grading so that this backlog can start working its way through, because I've got stacks of stuff waiting to ship off to PSA or BGS as soon as they open up. It's just not happening.
Yep, no, agreed. I like I said, I like it overall. I'd like to see more people in the space. I didn't even think about, it was a question I had, I didn't even think about live grading at Magic Fest or what have you moving forward, because that aligns this hobby more with sports and I think coins. And so here we are, with the name in industry trying to build a marketplace for vendors, opening up and offering something like this overall. And I guess the last point, just to touch on quickly, and we kind of did throughout, is just our thoughts on the success of the platform on the whole.
Yeah, and I think this can succeed. I think it's going to take a lot of push, though. Obviously, it's exciting for LGSs to have a platform that's only them.
Yep.
The problem is TCG is so entrenched at this point as the marketplace. Having that push to be able to say, okay, we want to steal this business from TCG player, let's do it.
Yep.
That's what it will take for it to succeed. But I would like it to, and I think it can.
Yep. I agree. And I think a lot of this push is going to come from Gen Con and Origins. It's going to be these events where a lot of LGSs show up just to see what's going on, attend panels, learn about, TCG often does their State of the Unions and what's coming down with hardware, and so people do, attend these and the dinners afterwards, and I think that's where a lot of this can shake out, and you'll see a lot of buy-in from the smaller stores. And once you have that and you get that buy-in from smaller stores that use Square, like you mentioned earlier, I think that's where the platform just kind of finds its legs, Yeah.
And I think, I hope it does. We'll see. But yeah, this next couple months is going to be pretty crucial for it.
Yep.
I do think it's kind of interesting that it's launching right before the holiday lull. Not sure timing-wise that's the best, but hey, I guess that does give LGS's time to get set up during the time not have as much going on. So.
Yeah, we don't know anything about like SKUs and how that's going to work, individual products, and if that's going to be a pain in the butt, then yeah, it's nice to have. I mean, they're not going to be able to do it in crunch time, but to move some stuff over and test the water out is probably easier sooner rather than later. And
for sure,
in the next couple of weeks, you have a little bit of time to experiment. So maybe there are incentives, etc., on the back end. Unsure, but picks.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Did I go last week or did you? Does it matter?
You went last week.
Okay. Well, we both went last week. So.
Well, yeah, so
2 weeks
you went
ago.
first last week.
That's all right. So then you can go first this week.
All right. I have Extended Art Culling Ritual. Why?
Good
This
question.
card does everything you want in black and green. It's a board wipe that ramps you. It is one of the most unique wipes that's been printed. Destroy each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less. That's pretty unique in the space. It's an EDH All-Star. It's not exactly the most played card, but coming out of Strixhaven right now is probably, and this is also kind of a market trend thing.
Yep.
I would be looking at Strixhaven now because we're about to be in new standard where Strixhaven is going to matter. And I think it will have an opportunity to shine in constructed play and especially in EDH long term. Now, if you look at the stocks graph, it's pretty static. It's been at about $10 for a while now for the foils. That said, the supply has dried up drastically over the last month or so on this card as we're seeing fewer and fewer packs opened. Collector's boosters are kind of sitting around collecting dust. We've moved on to Fate Reforged, Forgotten Realms, which didn't really sell well. We're about to have another release in Midnight Hunt, and there aren't a whole lot of collector's boosters for Strixhaven actually sitting in distros right now. So we've hit about everything we can. There's not a whole lot of this card sitting around waiting to be cracked still. Right now on the foils, let me see what we currently have, because we were at... Yoink. Yeah, we're at 47 listings, and we were at 96 about 2 weeks ago. So there's been a concentration of the listings being reduced.
Yep.
The price hasn't started to reflect that a whole lot yet. But if you look, we're sitting at about $10 all the way to the third page when it hits 12. So there's a lot of opportunity to move in on this card and get in. Timeline-wise, I think you're looking at probably, based on how some of the other extended art cards have been in recent sets, about a 6 to 8 month turnaround on this. And that's because we're getting a million versions of every card. Every set has millions of cards with millions of versions. Maybe that's an exaggeration. Whatever. But I think that this card especially is the type of thing that we're not going to see reprinted anytime soon. It is not plane specific, which is kind of worrisome, but we know that the next few sets we're not getting colored pairs. And that's the important thing, because that means that something like this is unlikely to get reprinted in the next year or so now that we know the release schedule. So I'd be looking at about 6 to 8 months turnaround on this based on what we've seen in the market with similar cards in the past.
Yeah.
Obviously, the market can change. That's just my expectation.
Nope. It's interesting to see. I wasn't sure. I had to check in on the one from Dragon's Maze because Pernicious Deed is an enchantment that sticks around for colorless black and green, and then you pay X, pop it, and you destroy all non-land permanents with mana value X or less. Gaze of Granite is a sorcery that costs X, double black, green. So this is effectively the cheapest way to do exactly this, and there's a payoff attached to it, which is the ramp, which makes it really unique. And in the space right now, uncertain if it's the best, but it's certainly better than Gaze of Granite.
Yeah, significantly.
Yeah. The benefit that Pernicious Deed has is that it's much more flexible in what it does because you can just pay anything into it. But I think this is, like you said, going to be a decent player in Standard and then, just kind of a mainstay in EDH for board wipes. I can't imagine this not seeing play. It's not Urborg and Mutilate good, but it is definitely really decent for anybody who plays at a table with decks that like to just churn out a lot of little creatures.
Yeah, any token strategy, stuff like that, it's great for.
Absolutely. I didn't even know this card existed. When you said Culling Ritual, I honestly thought this was something from like the middle era of Magic. Like, whatever.
It does seem like Ritual of the Machine or like Culling the Weak or something.
It was Culling the Weak that really just made me think of something from the Middle Ages of Magic. And I like I said, I do enjoy the spell. I didn't know it existed. It was probably something I should buy for EDH. So there you go.
Yeah. Proof positive.
Yeah, my pick is actually from probably more the Dark Ages of Magic than the Middle Ages of Magic, and it is Mog Infestation from Stronghold. And it's a card I've loved since I first started playing the game. Man, this thing's insane.
I love this card.
Costs 5, 3, double red. It's a sorcery. Destroy all creatures target player controls. target player. For each creature put into any graveyard this way, put 2 goblin tokens into play under that player's control. Treat these tokens as 1/1 red creatures. And if you fork this, you get 4 times that many spells. Ask me how I know. Fork that. You get 4 times as many creatures. I've had this on my watch list since early January of 2021, and CK was buying 15 at $1.50. There were 70 on TCG Player, LP or better for $6.20. And when I picked this, CK is now buying 25 at $5, which is an increase on both sides, and there's 68 for $8 on TCG Player right now. So a reduction in quantity, but increase in price. And in the interim, I'm sure a number have sold. So what do you do with this card? Well, let me bring up EDH Rec, and it becomes pretty clear. So what you're looking at are either goblins, token strategies, or Perforos, God of the Forge.
Yep.
Right? And it's a bit narrow overall when you start looking at this, but it's an easy single spell win. Even with Zodahedron Grinder, you just make a bunch of tokens, you pump them all, and you just get in there, right? So it's a weird self-board wipe. I can imagine you play like with a card like Arcanist in mono red, so you can rebuy it. You can wipe somebody's board of big creatures and make them a lot smaller and manageable. But I still really consider this a self-board wipe. That turns into a kill con or part of a combo with cards like Perforos or Krenko Mob Boss. And speaking of Krenko, this helps power up a themed goblin deck overall, right? Not terribly thematic in the tribal deck, but it does allow you to turn your anemic army into something more formidable that can take over and win. And again, Perforos and Impact Tremors are basically instant wins with this because they trigger for all the goblins that ETB. Now, I've been waiting on this card to see sustained movement, and now that we have and can see a solid slope, my expectation is in 6 months at a minimum, we'll be able to sell the buy list for profit. I would expect profits on the open market within the next month or two if you're able to buy around market price based on the trajectory we're seeing. And it took a really long time to get out of this slope. You know, it's September now, and I picked this up 8 months ago. That's a long, long rope that we saw in stocks. Like, I doubt we'll see this in any Commander content, as it seems well outside the quote-unquote field of vision of a lot of content creators. But if we do, and it does anything flashy, then we could see this blow up very quickly on the open market, which will then lead and trickle down to vendors, which means buy less increased. And something I had to think about for a while on this is reprint equity. And I don't think we'll see this in much other than a master set, and even if it is, it's really miserable in the draft format. So I believe we're pretty much insulated from a reprint on this. I thought, well, maybe we'll look at a set like A25 that wants to celebrate all the sets in Magic and might look really neat with a stronghold symbol behind it. We've had cards with the word Mog come back in master sets. I just don't see this coming back because the play pattern is so counterintuitive.
It's such a non-red card. This is one of the least red cards that's red that I think I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It's green. It's white and green. It destroys all creatures that one player has, and it doubles tokens. Those are white and green things.
Yeah.
I don't ever see this card getting reprinted.
Yeah, because I spent most of the time thinking, like, for this pick and writing up my notes, like, well, what's the reprint equity on this? Is this something that I pick and then get immediately dunked on into Commander set? And, like, maybe not, because to put it in a Commander set over Blasphemous Act seems silly, because Blasphemous Act is something very clear.
Yeah.
To make a Commander deck with something like Krenko Mob Boss or Perforos and put this card inside it seems like where it could end up. But again, the play pattern is so unclear that I just don't think you get this as a reprint. So I feel pretty safe about this in the long term, and it's a card that I'm basically happy sitting on and treating it like it's reserve list.
Yeah. This is a prime example of, we talk about the soft reserve list. This is kind of like basically reserve list.
Yeah.
I mean, this is soft reserve list. This effect is just so outlandish. I would never see them reprinting it.
No, not at all. Wait, did it jump up to 20? There's no way.
No.
No, okay. For whatever reason, the button on TCG Player is a $20 copy. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. 61 listings right now on TCG Player, so they're churning, but just not that regularly. So I'm not quite sure what happens when TCG Player stock runs out or this hits stocks on the daily. If anything, I see the shooting up, and if you want to sell on the FOMO, that's what I would do, and then I think it would be just drop back down over time until people really start integrating this into lists a lot more than we're seeing. The population on Rec overall is pretty low. It's according to Rec, it's in 0% of decks. So this is not a card that I'm picking based on immediate EDH usage. I know it's usable. Ask me how.
Yeah.
And I think this is just a card that's currently overlooked and we have the ability to get way in front of. Way in front of.
Yeah, I think that's the big point with this one, is that it is an opportunity to get way in front of, because this is very much one of those cards that I could just one day you wake up and all of a sudden it's a $30 card and you're like, I've never even heard of this card before.
Yeah.
Like, I only know because I drafted it in Stronghold. It was awesome. It was miserable, but it was awesome. And I knew it from there, and now it's like, all right, this is one of those unknown cards that exist from a time in Magic where you didn't have content creators, you didn't have a whole lot of eyes on things. It just didn't exist.
Yeah.
And that's the opportunity that you have with this card, is when it pops, it'll pop.
Absolutely.
And it probably won't come back because I don't see it getting a reprint.
Yep. And so that's my pick for the week. And I beg you, ask me how I know. I have some more stories.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be it for this week, though. Is there anything else more about the CFB announcements you want to talk about?
Nope, I think I'm good.
All right. And just, to toss us in at the end, this is something that we talked about in the Discord last week. We have a couple people that were on the platform, and so when these tweets went out, we put them up there because they're relevant. And the feels that we got on it were not quite ambivalent, a little bit negative, and so that's why we decided to talk about it this week, because this is immediately impactful to vendors. So, thanks again for our patrons and everybody in the Discord for engaging and having even the light conversation there, and those conversations turn into topics. So, thank you. But for MTG Cabalcast this week, where you can find us on Twitter, Patreon, YouTube, and Facebook as MTG Cabalcast. I am at Halt I Am Reptar.
I am at Thirsty Sizzler.
We'll see you next week.